Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, folks. My name is Matt Thomas, and thank you for tuning in to the USGS Landslide Hazards Seminar. This meeting is hosted by the Landslide Hazards Program and co-organized with contributions from Stephen Slaughter and Jamie Costello. For those of you that are new to this meeting, you have the ability to submit questions via the chat window or to use the raise your hand feature in combination with your microphone or video camera. We're going to wait until the end of the presentation to take questions. So in the meantime, please just do your best to make sure your microphone is muted and your video camera is off when you're not intending to speak. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Lynn Chastain Carpenter. Lynn currently serves as the Geologist and Program Manager of the Geologic Hazards Program for the National Office of the USDA Forest Service. This is the only position in the Forest Service that's dedicated to the understanding and management of geologic hazards in the U.S. Forest Service, and she has more than 25 years of experience in process development, project management, strategic planning, land management, stakeholder collaboration and outreach, and geologic, economic, and technical analysis. Her current position as the U.S. Forest Service's Geologic Hazards Program Manager, she says, has been one of the most challenging and rewarding of her career. Lynn, thanks so much for being with us today. Hey, Lynn, if you're talking, you're muted right now. You need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Thank you very much. I'm better now. And now I've lost my shared screen, of course. There we go. Okay, so I presume I can go ahead and give a talk. Thank you for the introduction. So I'll just go ahead and start with the presentation. I have a lot of slides to cover. So I just wanted to, when Matt has asked me to give a presentation about how I've been developing this Geologic Hazards Program, I was kind of thinking, I'm not really sure where to start with this. But in any case, my name is Lynn Carpenter. I am the Geologic Hazards Program Manager. There's only one position in the Forest Service that only deals with geologic hazards throughout the forests. And we're going to start with talking about the Forest Service and how it's arranged, some of the geologic hazards that we face, and then some of the approaches that I've taken over the last 3 years in this position. So we'll go to the next slide. So the Forest Service is a federal agency under the Department of Agriculture. I know many of you guys are in the Department of Interior, like the BLM and the Park Service and the USGS. We're one of their sister agencies. We manage 193 million acres of land, which is about the size of Texas, where we manage a little bit fewer acres of land than the BLM, but we manage more mountainous lands than the BLM. The mission of the Forest Service is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. We were established in 1905 to provide quality water and timber for the nation's benefit. And then later, Congress directed the Forest Service to broaden its management scope for additional multiple uses and benefits, and for the sustained yield of renewable resources such as water, forage, wildlife, wood, and recreation. So the Forest Service is divided into 4 basic levels. There's the national level, the regional level, the forest level, and the district level. So the forest at the national level, which is where I'm in the national level organization, we cover lands from Puerto Rico to Alaska, from Maine to California. And I'll go to the next level here. And so at the national level, the chief of the Forest Service manages, oversees the regional supervisors and provides coordinates between the regions. The second level is the regions, and so this is Region 1 up here in Montana and North Dakota. I'm in Region 2. Region 3 is down here in Arizona. Region 4 is the middle Southwest. Region 5 is California. Region 6 is basically Washington, Oregon. Oops, it keeps doing that. Washington, Oregon. And then regions 8 and 9 are in the eastern lands. Region 7 was absorbed into regions 8 and 9 several decades ago. And at the regional level, the regional forester is the decision maker, and they oversee the forest supervisors, and they coordinate activities between the national forests and grasslands. They monitor activities on those lands to ensure quality operations. They provide guidance for forest plans, and they allocate budgets to the different forests. The next level is the actual forests and grasslands. There are 154 national forests and 20 national grasslands. Each has several ranger districts, which we'll talk about in a minute. And there's a decision maker on the forest level. It's called the forest supervisor. And the forest supervisor directs the work of the district rangers, and they coordinate activities between districts, allocate the budget, and provide technical support to each district. So this is region 1 with multiple national forests and grasslands. The next level is the Forest Service districts. This is the San Juan National Forest down in southwestern Colorado, and it's composed of 3 different districts. And each district has its own decision maker called the district ranger. And the district ranger, there may be, on each district, there may be from 10 to 100 people working. And this is the typical level of the hierarchy where the average, the public would interact with the staff of the Forest Service is at the district level. There are more than 600 rangers districts across all of the Forest Service units. And I don't know why it keeps advancing on its own, so I'm sorry about that. In any case, the district range in size from 50,000 acres to more than 1 million acres in size. And most of our boots on the ground activities occur on the district level, including like trail construction, maintenance, operation of campgrounds, those kind of things. And within each of those levels, the national, the regional, the forest and grassland, and then the district level, we have physical scientists and geologists at all levels. And what the physical science and geologists do at each level, it really depends on where they are, their particular forest or region, what is going on as far as natural resources in the physical science realm. But in general, we work with these types of the physical scientists and the geologists on the Forest Service, work with leasable minerals, which is like oil and natural gas, locatable and saleable minerals, which is like precious and base metals, and then like sand and gravel. Geologic resources, which are like groundwater related resources, cave and karst, paleontological resources, and then also abandoned mine lands. Now, the Forest Service itself, we work on the surface impacts of these mineral activities. We work very closely with BLM on the actual mineral extraction because the BLM is the authority for minerals in the Forest Service. And then going on to the geologic hazards. So geologic hazards are geologic conditions which are naturally occurring or altered by humans that create a threat to public health and safety, infrastructure, or resources. So in a nutshell, if it threatens something that humans care about, it's considered a geologic hazard. If it's just a geologic process, like a slope forming process that doesn't threaten things, we don't consider them geologic hazards, we consider them geologic processes. And in general, there's the natural ones where they would happen regardless of the human activities. And then there's quite a few of especially relict human generated or exacerbated geologic hazards on the Forest Service. So let's talk about the organization of the Forest Service. Now let's talk about what kind of work we do as a land management agency. We manage more than 370,000 miles of forest system roads. Like, these are roads owned by the Forest Service and managed. These are 2 interns last summer working on the Shasta Trinity, assessing slope along these roads. These roads provide critical access to things like infrastructure like cell service or wildfire capabilities or ingress or egress. If it's the only way in and out for recreation, like there are many valleys in the Forest Service. And also if you have private inholders, they have access. We also manage 162,000 miles of Forest Service trails. This is one of our geologists in the Virginia looking at a recent rockfall on a trail in Virginia. We also manage 64,000 miles of motorized trails and 98,000 miles of non-motorized trails across the forests. We manage about 400 more or less sand and gravel pits and quarries. These are surface minerals. We manage the surface impacts. We also manage thousands of locatable mineral surface mine excavations, waste piles, and impoundments. A lot of these are relict impacts from mining activities from century or decades ago. We also own or have under special use authorization about 1,800 dams. More than 50% of these are beyond their design life, so serious problems there. And we also manage millions of acres of old timber harvest and associated skid trails, skid roads, and log landings. A lot of these are from the middle 20th century, where when we were building the roads, we were not cognizant of how impactful the landslides could be after disturbing the slope stability by building on very steep roads. This particular one is in California, and we had log landings fail after a precipitation event that came down the valley and impacted communities below. So again, we go back to natural processes versus geologic hazard. We face a wide variety. I'm going to go through kind of some of the things that we see on the Forest Service, and these are just two kind of random. I pull these at random examples, and one is extreme precipitation events causing flooding and landslides, and also rockfall events that are. This is in California or Colorado. So we see all of these different geologic hazards on the Forest Service: mass wasting, floods, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, subsidence of all kinds, and naturally occurring hazardous materials. So we'll go through those in a little bit more detail. But before we go into each hazard, I want to just, when we're going through these hazards, think to yourself, how would you manage this hazard if you were a land manager? Is it you can manage the hazard directly, where like these guys here are putting mesh down to keep the rockfall from going onto the road? And in this case, this is Little Mill Campground in Utah, where we had a severe rockfall hazard. We ended up closing parts of the campground and making other parts day use areas to minimize the risk. We did not address the physical hazard. In many cases, it's either too expensive or not possible. So we manage the risk of the people or things below those hazards. And I'm preaching to the choir on this one. Landslides are downslope movements of earth materials. This is an example of the West Salt Creek landslide in Colorado. It's almost 3 miles long. It was initiated on Forest Service lands, traveled across private and state lands, came really close to impacting a oil and gas facility here, did kill 3 people, unfortunately. But this is the kind of large-scale problematic infrastructure that is impacted by landslides on the Forest Service. We have numerous examples. And to kind of bring that point home, I took the Forest Service units and I overlaid it on the prototype landslide hazard map of the continuous United States by GOT in 2012. You can see where we have higher landslide risk is where we tend to have our Forest Service units, in that along the Appalachians, along the Pacific, and then in the Rocky Mountain region. And this is from the USGS. Is again nothing new to you guys, but the average cost of landslides across the United States in general, $2 to $4 billion and 25 to 50 deaths on average. This is a landslide on the El Yunque National Forest after Hurricane Maria. And again, going back to the natural versus the human exacerbated, landslides are one of the more human exacerbated geologic hazards that we deal with, because we inherited roads, and we tend to build roads. We need to have roads to access the timber or to access mineral excavations, or we put in roads or trails for recreation. And so when we disturb these steep slopes, we often exacerbate the conditions that cause landslides. And there's also a different degree of responsibility for the natural, or, it was just a natural event versus the ones that we exacerbated. And I can't go too far without mentioning the Wrangell landslide in Alaska that happened the Monday before Thanksgiving that killed 5 people, just damaged or destroyed 3 houses. And it probably, I'm not exactly sure where this is exactly, but I suspect very strongly that this started on Forest Service lands. There's also state lands in that area, and then traveled across the highway and took out the 3 roads. Another type of geologic hazard that we face all the time on Forest Services lands is flooding. There's 2 general types of systemic and regional flooding, which is caused by things like atmospheric rivers or hurricanes. And then there's flash floodings, which tend to happen in the more arid areas, but not exclusively. We've seen flash flooding in pretty much every area of the United States. It's our most frequent and expensive natural disaster, as it would be in other, I think in general, land managers would say that. The one I wanted to mention that was particularly impactful for the Forest Service was the Albert Pike Recreation Area 2010 flood. It was in June 11 of 2010. It had as much as 7 inches of rain fell on the upper Little Missouri River and killed 20 campers. It was devastating. So we went back, and when the Forest Service was looking at, what happened, what can we do to, fix this and prevent this from happening again, we looked at the camping areas. There's 4 camping areas: Loop A, B, C, and D. The gray area here is the 1% annual floodplain risk. so that what we would often call the 100-year floodplain. And we noticed that loops C and D were pretty much all in the 100-year floodplain, and parts of loop A and B were in the 100-year floodplain. So what we ended up deciding to do was completely closing loops D and C and making everything else, all these other parking areas, as day use only. So we can't fix the flooding problem because especially with climate change, we're going to have more of these extreme events, but we can manage the risk part of the equation. One of the ones I want to mention here is that the Angeles National Forest was the 1928 St. Francis Dam failure. And I want to mention on the side here, pretty much every slide that I'm talking about, you could do a whole presentation on. So I highly recommend, if you're not familiar with, especially this one, St. Francis Dam failure, it's one that's well worth your time to go and look at. What happened was the engineer had built a dam somewhere else in Southern California and just took the same plans and just designed it for this different site. Did not take into consideration the geologic conditions below the dam or surrounding the dam. It was built, there's a landslide on this side, there's a fault, there's differential geologic units that had more and less hydraulic conductivity. That it didn't even make it to full pool before it failed. It killed over 450 people downstream as it went from the dam to the Pacific Ocean. It was devastating. But this was the dam that really caused engineers in general to understanding the site location and the geology underneath and surrounding these dams is critical to understanding how to build and engineer the dam. Another dam failure was the 1977 Toccoa flood. This one is personal to me. My mother is from Toccoa. This happened in early November 1977. I was 6 years old. I remember going to Thanksgiving that year at my mother's parents' place, and the atmosphere was just devastating. And we went and saw some of these sites as a kid, and even today it was so impactful to me as a 6-year-old that I really don't like camping or sleeping below a dam. I really don't. When I was looking for a new house, I will not buy one below a dam. It really impacted me. And neither this dam, the Kelly Dam, or the Angeles flood were owned and managed by the Forest Service, but they were on Forest Service lands. And like I mentioned in the previous slide, we have special use permits that other entities manage and own those dams, but since they're on Forest Service lands and they impact Forest Service infrastructure, we have a very complex relationship with each of these dam owners and understanding how to manage and protect people downstream from these events. The next one I want to mention is earthquakes. If you remember that previous slide with all of our lands, we have lands that have significant earthquake risk here, the New Madrid fault zone and parts of the Appalachian area, and then up into the northeastern of the United States. One of the ones that the most famous earthquake-related damages on Forest Service lands is Quake Lake. Quake Lake is just outside the Yellowstone National Park. And what happened was in 1959, a 7.3 magnitude earthquake triggered this landslide that dammed the Madison River. Also, if you notice here, there's a dam on Hegben Lake, and there was also a seiche on Hegben Lake that was serious concerns that the dam may be overtopped and fail, which would even multiply the downstream outburst flood risk from this dam damming up the Madison River. Now, luckily, the Corps of Engineers came and engineered a throughway for this for the river to go through, so that it wouldn't cause an outburst flood. But 28 people died. Many were there's a campground directly under this quake, this landslide here, and they were killed pretty much instantly. But the others were killed because the earthquake damaged the roads and also the flooding in the area. This is the before. Here's the landslide area here. And then as you can see here, it basically fell from the top of the ridge all the way down, damming the lake, and damming the river, and here's where the river was trying to break through. And luckily, we did not have an outburst flood from this particular one. But this also kind of enforces the point that a lot of the hazards we face are cascading hazards. We had an earthquake, which caused a landslide, which caused potentially a flood. And we also see that with volcanism. So this is the Mount St. Helens National Monument. I want to remind people that this is a national monument that's managed by Forest Service, and it's on Forest Service lands. So again, this was one where a cascading hazard. So there was an earthquake, which triggered the landslide, which triggered the eruption. And here's all the major volcanoes in the Northwestern United States, and the Forest Service manages lands surrounding or underneath all of these volcanoes except for three: Mount Rainier, Greater Lake, and Lassen Peak, which are all managed by the Park Service. And that kind of, we have an interagency relationship with our sister agencies of the BLM and the Park Service, especially on how managing these lands and making sure that we're consistent across, consistent with our messaging to the public and understanding these hazards and risks. Here's the volcanic centers in California, and we also manage, I think 6 of these are under on Forest Service lands. And here's a rather unusual geologic hazard. It's a carbon dioxide hazard area. It's over here in the Long Valley near Mammoth Lake. And basically what happens is the CO2 is seeping through the ground from the volcanism in the area. In the summertime, it's not a problem, but in the wintertime, this CO2 gets caught up in the snowpack. So there's no cross-country skiing here, no sledding, no snowmobiles, don't dig a snow cave, but you would never know this because you can't smell carbon dioxide. You would never know there's a problem, except that we sign the area and let the public know not to be here in the wintertime or when there's snow. It's a really unusual geologic hazard. Tsunami, this is, of course, we face challenges and risks and threats from the larger tsunami across like the Pacific Ocean, but this is one that's very well known. This is the Barry Arm landslide, which is about maybe 1 3/4 miles across and about 3/4 of a mile high. And if this fails, here's the landslide here, it could cause a tsunami that could reach the town of Whittier. So there's been a lot of work done by the USGS and the state on early warning systems to the residents of Whittier, so that they know to get up and out of the way in case there is a landslide triggered tsunami in the area. You notice I'm tying landslides into a lot of our cascading hazards in this area, but in general, I mean, we face quite a bit of tsunami threats, particularly in in Alaska. We have the Chugach National Forest and the Tongass National Forest, which both face tsunamis from the Pacific. We also have some lands on the coast of Oregon and some lands on the coast in South Carolina that may also face tsunami threats, but in general, it's our Region 10 that faces the most threats from tsunami. There's also the Seiche. Seiches are oscillating waves. And we mentioned the one that was at Hegben Lake in Montana. This is one in Alaska where it was triggered by a landslide up here, fell into this lake. The lake sloshed back and forth and overtopped its outlet and scoured this stream bed here. And then there's another one that we worked on in the last 10 years. It's the Cook Lake landslide. This is in the Black Hills. And you can see here, this is the 1994 aerial photograph and a 2006 aerial photograph. And here's a dam, it's a reservoir. This is not movement. And then this landslide is starting to move. We do have developed recreation areas right across from the landslide. Here's a close-up of this landslide. We asked Paul Santi of the Colorado School of Mines to do an assessment of this area. And I'll quote from his report, quote, based on these factors, there is a legitimate concern that the reactivated Cook Lake landslide might move rapidly. The slide surface and toe area could be hazardous during wet conditions or heavy rainfall or snowmelt, unquote. So a couple of things that we've done in this area, we can't really fix the landslide, so we're reducing our risk. We've made either these, we've closed many of these areas across here for recreation, or we've made them day use only. We've also lowered worked with the dam owners to lower the reservoir levels in this lake, so if it does fail, it wouldn't overtop the dam. Another geologic hazard that we face in the Forest Service are naturally occurring hazardous materials, such as naturally occurring asbestos, naturally occurring uranium, and these are maps. And this is Northern California, where you might expect to find naturally occurring asbestos. So we're doing trail work or firefighting or anything that disturbs the ground and raises dust, we should be aware of and be careful of. And also the public, the recreating public should be aware. This is a likelihood of naturally occurring uranium on the Colorado Plateau based on some of the ages of the rock. And so again, just being aware of where our naturally occurring hazardous materials are. This one in the middle is actually BLM land. and they've had quite a challenge. It's a known naturally occurring asbestos area that there's a lot of recreational vehicle use. It's been a complex history, and it's one that I think the Forest Service has learned from on management of areas that have these naturally occurring hazardous materials, how to, signage and public awareness campaigns, and because they tried to close it and the public did not really want that. And so at some point we have to, the public they assume a certain risk by recreating on public lands. But when it's an unusual hazard, such as natural occurring asbestos or maybe a rockfall area, then I think it behooves us as land managers to just give the public the information that they need to make the decisions on their behalf. It's kind of where we stand. So this is subsidence. We have subsidence of all kinds. One is collapsible soils. This tends to be more in the arid and semi-arid areas like Southwest United States, but basically it happens a lot on floodplains where you have dry and loose. When the floodplains are created, they're dry and loose, but if they get wet and have pressure on them, they'll collapse. This one it's an unusual geologic hazard. It doesn't typically threaten health and safety, but it definitely threatens our infrastructure, causes significant costs to repair. This is obviously not on Forest Service lands, but this is just an extreme example of land subsidence due to overpumping of water. This is the elevation of the land back in 1925 and then 1977. And then we have karst hazards, sinkholes, and we have sinkholes where you wouldn't necessarily expect it, like Alaska and in the mountains of Colorado. So here's a road, Forest Service road, that has a sinkhole underneath it. And I know that the geologist up on the Tongass does a lot of work when they do new logging roads or new mineral excavation roads, identifying karst areas and helping the planners understand, where they need to just do more exploration and understanding, and where the areas are probably not underlain by karst. So it's a lot of planning and preparatory work, and also we rely significantly on our subject matter experts, such as our geologist on the Tongass, who has a very good understanding of where the karst areas are in that area. Karst, we have all kinds of karsts on the Forest Service. We have the carbonate, which is the one that people typically think about, but we also have the evaporite karst and the volcanic karst, which is like the lava tubes. This is an unusual karst hazard. So this was built many, many decades ago. It's an RV dump station. This is on one of the eastern states. So we have, RVs come by, dump their black and gray water into the dump station, which is a septic system. And right over here, we have a sinkhole. So when they built this dump station, we didn't understand that this is a sinkhole, and this is right on the edge of karst terrain. It's actually a big fault, pretty much right under this parking lot. And on the far side of the fault, from this picture's perspective, is underlain by limestone. The near side is underlain by, I believe, granitic rocks. So understanding if we put in these dump stations, how it might impact the groundwater and even local flora and fauna in this area. So it's one of the things that we face with our inherited geologic hazard, where humans have exacerbated the hazard. And this is a classic example of that. Another one that we deal with quite significantly on the Forest Service, especially in the last several decades, is post-fire geologic hazards. And this is burned area emergency response. We do a lot of work looking at post-fire, and we work very closely with the USGS, understanding which drainages are more or less prone to having potential debris flow or hyperconcentrated flows. We also provide warnings to the public when they're recreating in areas that have been burned, that those burned areas are especially vulnerable to flash flooding, and they should be aware of that. We also have our own impacts directly from post-fire. This is a landslide on the Mount Hood from the Riverside fire, of a landslide that's impacted our roads. But a lot of the post-fire impacts come downstream and off of Forest Service lands. This is the classic, unfortunately, example of the Montecito debris flows. 23 people died. This was directly, I think, less than a month or maybe 2 months after the Thomas fire. So the Forest Service and other agencies had very little time to do some of the work that would reduce the hazard in the burn area. So it was just a very unfortunate series of events, a combination of a fire and then a subsequent atmospheric river that dumped significant water right on top of the burn area. So we've talked about a lot about, you probably have a better appreciation for some of the geologic hazards that the Forest Service faces. And not only do we face it is in terms of, just naturally occurring geologic hazards, but the fact that a lot of the actions that we have done in the past and are doing even currently, in many cases, exacerbate those hazards by building new roads, for example. So we can do management action. We can identify, in this case, like you can see here, this road is failing. It's a classic example where they had to put new pavement down because this side of the road is failing. We can manage the actual hazards themselves. We can put soil nails walls in, like in this picture. But one of the biggest things we can do as a Forest Service manager is we can manage the water. When we change the hydraulic regime on a slope by putting in infrastructure of all kinds, it could be a pipeline, a road, a trail, then it behooves us to basically make sure that the water doesn't do further or do additional damage other than what it would normally do. So cleaning out culverts is a classic example, making sure our culverts are clean, making sure that the ditches are dug out, making sure that the water drains properly off the roads, all these kind of management actions that we can do that does significantly reduce the impacts of, especially large precipitation events, which cause both flooding and often trigger things like landslides and debris flows. So I'm hoping this will work, but if it doesn't work, I'm going to go to another screen. This is a risk management. Before we go there, so this was another risk management action. This is a classic example as well. In this case, a road in Tennessee, they had a rock fall. The rock was about the size of a car, big rock fall in some definitions. And so they were cleaning off the road. They called the DOT geologist to come look. And what she saw was additional popping sounds and raveling coming down from the slope. So she cleared everyone out. And I'm not sure how much further after the fact, but not very long after she cleared everybody out, there was a significant landslide event. I'm going to try and switch to here it is. So I'm going to play this.
Just to come take a look.
We have some unstable material, we believe, up at the top, some large boulders.
TDOT geologist Vanessa Bateman from Nashville was summoned to the site yesterday after the first slide. But when she arrived just before noon, what she found was something a lot more serious than what she expected. Popping sounds coming from the rock face.
We didn't just hear it once. You hear it, wait a little bit of time, and then you hear it again. And that was the thing that really said, hey, wait a minute, we've got a major problem up on this slope.
Ms. Bateman quickly advised everyone, TDOT managers, work crews, and even this News 12 crew to move away. Her quick work likely saved a lot of lives. Meanwhile, she says Alan Fairbanks' video was spectacular.
Seeing the video of the slide was incredible. Actually being able to watch that kind of over and over again. You don't appreciate just how fast an 18-wheeler sized rock can move down a slope until you see it on tape and then watch it again and again.
Okay, so I think it advanced while I was waiting. Okay, here we go. So just to kind of talk about that a little bit more. So they had experienced people and engineers out on the site, but I want to emphasize that one of the management activities that the Forest Service is working on is making sure we have all the breadth of the science that is needed to make the decisions. In this case, they didn't have a geologist on the site. They probably had civil engineers and other road engineers there. And the geologist was the one who knew to look up and what signs to look for our continued instability. So I just want to mention that too. So now we've talked about, the structure of the Forest Service. We talked about some of the things that we see, what kind of geologic hazards we see. We see what kind of opportunities we have to manage these geologic hazards, both on the hazard side and the risk side. So now we're coming to the Geologic Hazards Program that I've been developing. I want to mention that before I came on to the Forest Service in 2020, this position that I'm in right now, the Geologic Hazards Program Management person, was vacant for almost a decade. I think 8 or 9 years it was vacant. So I kind of came in and was starting from scratch to create a program. And I am not a geologic hazard specialist. When I came into this program, I had the complete idea that I would be relying on specialists that have experience with geologic hazards of all the wide breadth of geologic hazards, both within the Forest Service and external to the Forest Service. So with that in mind, what I have been focusing on is a kind of combination of these types of things: outreach, which is what I'm doing right now, like training both for myself and leading training for both internally and externally within our program. Special project where I assist local districts on specific unit problems like geologic hazards. A specialist network development where I learn who's doing what on different forests, and I can pair up. A person on Forest A has a landslide problem. A person on Forest B has been working on this landslides for 20 years. So I get those two people together and they can have a conversation. And what does work? What doesn't work? Where do they get the funding? All these, not just the science side, but also the government management side of working with these geologic hazards, and then interagency and outside of federal government in collaboration. So internal, I want to integrate geologic hazards considerations into all of our high priority programs. We have a climate change office, and obviously climate change is a real driver of things like flooding and landslides. Watershed protection program. How can we manage our watersheds to reduce our impacts, reduce the likelihood of having debris flows? Transportation engineering, when we build roads or we manage roads, or we're identifying areas that are high priority for rockfall or landslide issues. Recreation program, again, how do we communicate with the public about what risks they are facing that are unusual? I mean, there's obviously a risk anytime you go onto the Forest Service lands or any other public land, but what's unusual in this particular area that they may not be aware of? The soil and moisture network, because the soil moisture, antecedent soil moisture, especially with landslides, is a real, can be used as a predictor for landslide susceptibility and hazard risk. Public and staff health and safety program and the emergency response program, both. What happens after we have a geologic hazards? For anything from a single landslide to a volcanic eruption, there's a wide breadth of response. Who is responsible for what? Environmental justice, again, like the Montecito fire, we often have things in the one in Wrangell, Alaska. We have downstream impacts that affect private and state entities off of Forest Service lands. We also have, burned area emergency response and burned area rehabilitation programs where we're looking at post-fire areas that have increased hazard and risk from especially debris flows and flooding. And then also I work with site-specific assistance, like I mentioned before. Externally, I've been working with other federal agencies, and particularly with the National Landslide Preparedness Act. I'm on the Interagency Coordination Committee with some other people from the Forest Service. Increasing consistency with geologic hazards management, and especially with public communication with our sister agencies like the Park Service and the BLM. How can we be consistent? We shouldn't have signs changing color and language when we go from the BLM lands to the Forest Service lands. How can we work together to make sure that's much more seamless? Obviously, we have different rules and regulations about what we can and can't do, but we can probably work together pretty well to be more consistent. I can learn from other agencies, like I was mentioning before, the BLM with the naturally occurring asbestos area, learning from them. What did they do? What did work? What didn't work? What were their parameters? What could they not do that maybe we can do? Those kind of things. I also want to facilitate access to Forest Service lands for research for the USGS and states. Collaborating with state agencies, such as the American Association of State Geologists. We have an MOU with them. So if you're with a state agency and you want to work with the Forest Service, please let me know. I'm happy to work with you on that. State universities as well. And then other entities, private universities, conservation organizations, counties, townships, and tribes. I haven't really gotten to that point yet. I've only been in this position for a little over 3 years, but those are definitely on my radar. And I'll be very interested in working with other entities on how we manage geologic hazards on the Forest Service and how that might impact communities off-slope, downslope from our. So here's some examples of outreach, like webinars like the one that I'm doing right now. I also work with the AEG, it's Association of Engineering and Environmental Geologists, at the national conferences, learning from their case studies. I'm working with the Rocky Mountain Research Station. And this is their geomorphic road analysis and inventory program, and they identify landslides when they do these surveys. It's fantastic. There's a great overlap. They're looking at sediments coming off roads and impacting fisheries. Training, Yanni Schwartz and I coordinated an internal geologic hazards program training for Forest Service geologists, hydrologists, soil scientists, and other technical specialists in the Forest Service. It was fantastic. And honestly, I think in many cases, it's more about the connections you make in the classroom with the different people that you can reach out to if you need help. Because a lot of times the physical scientists may be the only physical scientists on the entire forest. So they don't have another physical scientist in their local area that they can rely on. But I also do my own training. I did some rockfall modeling training so that whenever I'm like reviewing reports or providing information to the the different forests and grasslands, I have a better understanding of things like what these programs can and can't do. What are the limitations of these modeling programs? This is an example of where I was working with the Shasta Trinity National Forest on glacial outburst debris flows coming off of Mount Shasta here in the background. I'm not sure if this is going to play. Let's see if this will play. It won't play. Okay. In any case, this was a plane that all these are fresh debris flow deposits. They took out covered up a bridge, covered up a road. One person, they don't know if they died from a debris flow, but they couldn't find the person. They found his bicycle. So these are hazardous in and of themselves. They could be raging torrents at times. Oh, there it goes. So you can see the widespread impacts of these debris flows on the Mount Shasta Trinity. I also provide site-specific assistance, not only like with the Mount Shasta, but also in this case, this was a rock fall on the Pike National Forest, and these rocks are 30 feet in diameter, huge rocks. And this is the trail that it led down to the trails, the rock fall trail down to the recreation trail below. And what I worked on was providing some understanding of the annual individual risk for people hiking on this trail, because the question we've determined pretty quickly there's nothing we could do about the rock fall, the hazard itself. So now we're going to look at the risk. So what is the risk of someone hiking in this 120-foot section of this trail every time they looked at it? And the high, I did kind of bracketed, the high was about 1 in 200,000 chance of being hit by a rock, and the low was just under a 1 in a million chance of being hit by a rock. And so what ultimately they decided to do, so the options were close the trail, sign the trail, move the trail. And so what the district ranger ultimately decided to do with this information was sign both ends of the hazard zone so that the people hiking on there would know not to stop and eat their lunch and take the pictures, just hike through and don't stop in this particular section of the trail. I'm developing a specialist network, not only internal to the Forest Service, but also outside. Again, AEG, this is a meeting we had in Golden, Colorado. I joined the BEAR team this summer to meet other specialists that specialize in post-fire debris flow and other geologic hazards. Interagency collaboration, I'm on the Federal Interagency Working Group for Environmental Justice. I'm on the Committee for the National Strategy for Landslide Loss Reduction. I also support work that's done, mostly done by the Park Service and the Federal Highways, but I'm supporting the Unstable Slope Management Program with them. And then also looking at the Shira program on the Department of Interior. We're trying to bring that same or a similar program over to the Forest Service to help us similarly manage these hazard identifications and understanding the risk management on the Forest Service. Outside of Forest Service, AASG, I mentioned that before. This was when I joined the state of Colorado it's actually a Colorado State Park, but the land is Forest Service owned. So they were doing a geologic hazard assessment. So I joined these guys. It was enlightening. The woman who was doing the work was experienced and had identified some hazards that I hadn't thought about. Mainly the one was the collapsible soil hazard. So that's the end of my presentation. I just want to let you guys know if you want to collaborate with the Forest Service on geoscience in general, even if it's not geologic hazards, you can contact me and I can get you in touch with the people who may be able to do that for you in the future. So I appreciate the time and I'm open to any questions.